This is Research Like a Pro, Episode 4, the first part of Locality Research. Welcome to Research Like a Pro, a genealogy podcast about taking your research to the next level, hosted by Nicole Dyer and Diana Elder, accredited genealogy professional. Diana and Nicole are the mother-daughter team at FamilyLocket.com and the creators of the Amazon best-selling book, Research Like a Pro, a Genealogist's Guide. I'm Nicole, co-host of the podcast. Join Diana and me as we discuss how to stay organized, make progress in our research, and solve difficult cases. Let's go. Hello and welcome to Research Like a Pro. I'm Nicole, welcome, and we are talking about locality research today. But first, Diana has a few announcements.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the podcast today. I'm really excited because we opened up registration for the Research Like a Pro study group and e-course this week, and we've had lots and lots of response. Many people are excited to get going on the process. But I wanted you to know that the e-course will be available for registration all through the month of August. And it will be starting on September 1st. Materials will be ready that day. And for the next little bit, you can get the e-course for $89 until Sunday, August 19th. So that's a discount. And if you're interested in joining us for the study group, we have just a few positions open for that. And that will be $150, also a discount until Sunday, August 19th. So you've got a couple of weeks to think about if you'd like to jump in and make the commitment to either be part of the study group or do this process at your own pace and be part of the e-course. And as a special promotion, because we're so excited and want to give everybody an opportunity to have access to the book and the great templates, the ebook is 50% off for the entire month of August over on Amazon, just for $4.99. So if you've been really interested, curious about it, perfect opportunity to go over and take a look and see what we have to offer for you.
Great. All right. So let's jump into our topic today, locality research. And we've already done our make an objective in episode 2, and we've talked about analyzing your sources in episode 3. So we talked all about how to gather up your sources, make a timeline, a chronology, analyze the timeline, and note any questions, and then review the source, information, and evidence of each record. So now that you've done all that, your analysis is complete and you're ready to prepare to research. So a key part of preparing to research is locality research. Can you tell us more about that?
Sure. I think this is one of the steps that we don't really realize we need to do. And before we can actually plan our research, we've got to know what records are available. I always come back to the statement, we don't know what we don't know. So locality research is all about digging into the location where your ancestor lived, looking really in depth at the history, the geography, the type of records that will be available in that area, and really seeing what else is out there for you besides just the things that you're finding on Ancestry.com or Family Search. So as an accredited genealogist, I have my specialty is the Gulf South of the United States, and all of the accredited genealogist professionals have a specific region where they are tested on and have done a project on, and that's their region that they know really well. And other professional genealogists do the same. They may be just specializing in their specific state or a county, because it just helps you so much if you know exactly what is there for your locality. So in the book, I talk about the locality of the Chickasaw Nation, which is in Oklahoma. It was before Oklahoma statehood. And when I first started researching, I figured out that 12 of my 15 paternal ancestors lived there, but I didn't know enough yet to start digging into the locality and start really learning about the records. I would just put it into my genealogy database. Oh, they were in Chickasaw Nation for the marriage or the census or what have you. So when I started doing my accreditation 4-generation report, my first generation, Dora and William Houston Schultz, they were in this location. And I was really confused with all the localities in the records For instance, I had some histories from their children, and the children kept mentioning these different locations. They didn't really match up with what I was seeing in the records or what I was seeing on maps right now. So I needed to figure out what was going on with their family. They moved around a lot. And so I decided I would just make a timeline and try to find out where they were at each point of their lives. So important to get going on locality research, and it can be part of your timeline.
Right. I like the idea of really looking at your timeline and then thinking about all the different locations that each event happens and asking yourself, do I know where this is? And then figuring it out.
Exactly. And how far away are things? And does it make sense that they were in one location and then moved in between? So it gives us another way to analyze our ancestors' actions and what's going on in their lives.
Great. All right, let's talk about how to do this. So in the book, you talk about the 3 questions that you should ask when doing locality research. What happened? Where did it happen? And why did it happen? Why did it happen? And then after learning all about these questions, the assignment afterward is to make a locality guide. So throughout this podcast, we'll be talking about making a locality guide. Can you tell us what a locality guide is?
Sure. A locality guide is just where I like to start a Google Doc, but you can do it in Microsoft Word or Evernote, OneNote, whatever. It's where you put all the information you have about researching a family. So you would put links to websites that are going to be really helpful. You would put information on the history, the geography. You could put links to great maps. You could even copy some maps into your locality guide. It's all the information that you would need in researching a family.
Tell us right now, what is the most recent locality guide that you made and kind of how many pages is it, just so we can get an idea?
Well, when I did accreditation, I did locality guides for all my states, and they were several pages long because they were for states. But I also do a guide for each little county that I research in, especially if it's a new location and not in my states, or if I just want to focus more in on a county. So the latest locality guide I made was for Russell County, Alabama, because I was doing a project there for the last study group. And so that one is a county guide. It isn't as long as a state guide. I'm going to guess it was maybe 2 or 3 pages long. So that was not as long and detailed because I have my Alabama state guide, which is that's actually part of the book. And you can see if you've got the book or if you've viewed the work samples online that it's several pages long. But my county guide is only about 2 or 3.
Great. I think that will be helpful for our listeners. But mostly a locality guide is links, I think, when I've looked at ours. We usually put links to different websites and places that have information. We don't copy and paste a ton into the locality guide. It's more like a resource list of all the things that are available out there. Links to maps, links to county histories, links to record groups, and that kind of thing, right?
Right, because sometimes you discover these really great websites and you don't want to forget about them, but you don't really know where to put them. I bookmark a lot of websites, but I don't want to have a bookmark with thousands of links to it. So I like to put those right into my locality guide. And then I also add a little note. Whenever I come across a new collection or a new website, I do a little exploring on there just to try to understand more what's available. And so I don't just do the link in my locality guide. I also add a note to myself that this has great digitized images of all the pensions in Oklahoma, for instance, for one of the websites there, because we forget. We look at something and we think, wow, this is great. I need to remember this. And of course, we are not going to remember it. So we can put those notes right in our locality guide. And then when we want to go look for it, there it is.
Yeah. So not only will it help us with this current project that we're doing, but I think one of the goals for the locality guide is that we can use it in the future for any projects we might have in that area next time.
Absolutely. And we can keep adding to our locality guides. So, for instance, I just read an article on Georgia and the early laws of the state, and it was so great because I could just put a link right into my Georgia locality guide. I had a section for laws, and this new article went right in there. And it was so fun to not have to worry about ever finding that again, because now I know if I go to my Georgia guide for laws, there are my links. And so each time I come across something, I can really quickly add to it, which means I'm just building up a better and better resource for myself for future research.
So why wouldn't someone just go buy a research guide for that locality?
You know what? You can do that. I have purchased several of the NGS locality guides, but it's really difficult to keep a locality guide current because you have new articles being written all the time. We have new websites that pop up on our localities. We have new newspaper collections that are being added, new family search collections, new ancestry collections. So I think it's great to buy a locality guide if that is something that you really want to do, but I really like to have my own because I understand how my brain works and I can find things in my own locality guide easier because it's set up the way I want it to be set up.
Agreed. I like that. That's a good point. And I also was thinking that when I made my own research guide for South Carolina, for example, I learned so much in the process. I'm not going to sit down and read a book about resources in South Carolina because it's tedious. But when you're making something, you write everything yourself, so you learn it better. So I think it's kind of like the act of creating really helps you even learn it better.
Absolutely. I completely buy into that. There's something about writing and creating that makes our brains work better and it helps us remember things. So I agree with that wholeheartedly.
Great. Well, why don't we jump into question 1, what happened? And throughout this podcast, we'll talk about each of the 3 questions that you should ask during locality research. What happened? Where did it happen? And why did it happen? So let's get started on that.
Okay, so when we're talking about what happened, this is where your timeline that you worked on in previous projects is going to come into play. This is where you're going to review your timeline and the location of each event and see what is missing. See if things are making sense. There might be things that your timeline revealed that you don't know. You might be wondering about if there was an extra marriage for an ancestor, if the family attended church, if there were taxes, if they have land purchases, court records, probate, military, all these different kinds of things that you wonder about with your family. Since you've made your timeline, you can kind of start getting a feel for what might be missing. So what happened simply is just looking at your timeline, analyzing your family, and trying to get a feel for what was going on in your ancestor's life. So in the example in the book, back to my family of William and Dora Schultz, they were living in the Chickasaw Nation, Indian Territory, and I was a little puzzled with a marriage location. Their daughter, Lorraine, had said that the couple were married in Pauls Valley, Oklahoma, but I had a copy of their marriage license. And their marriage license and certificate says Indian Territory Southern District. It doesn't say anything about Pauls Valley or Oklahoma. And I was just kind of confused because then I also have a record, or on that same marriage license and certificate, it lists their residence as Elmore, Indian Territory. So for the same event, I have 3 different locations, or seemingly different locations. So this is kind of what inspired me to learn about the location of the Chickasaw Nation, wondering about this particular marriage.
That's a good thing to consider. Kind of what are the different places and jurisdictions?
Yes. You're taking a look at your timeline, trying to figure out what happened, and then you're going to really try to figure out where those different locations are.
The next question is, where did it happen? You'll look at all the lists on your timeline and choose one place in your list of locations that might answer your research question. So maybe your question is, where and when was my ancestor born? So you might know about their later life and have census records from when they were an adult, but your research question is when and where were they born? And so if your earliest location that you have them tracked to is in Texas, then you might think maybe they were born in Texas. Or maybe the census records give you a clue that they were born in Arkansas. So maybe you want to focus on Arkansas because that's where you think they were born, but you don't have their birth records. So you need to kind of learn about what records are available for birth records in Arkansas. So that would be a good place to start a locality guide for.
Right. And keep in mind that if we have migrating ancestors like we do, you might have one individual and they move, in our case, Georgia, Alabama, Texas, Indian Territory. So you might have to do 4 different locality guides, but you don't have to do them all at once. Choose the one place that, like you mentioned, your research question, and do that one. Do a little quick guide for that area. And then as you move to a different research question, you can do the guide for that area. So don't let this be an overwhelming task. It's just, you just do what you need to at that particular point in time for your research question.
Right. I had that same problem during the first study group. There were 4 different locations that pertained to the people in my research objective. And I finally realized my objective was too large. And so when I narrowed it down and thought about what I really wanted to know, which was about the Civil War service of Moses Eisenhower, then I was able to narrow it down to do a locality guide for the county that he served from. So Montgomery County, Arkansas. And that really helped me to hone in on the right location. So if you're not sure which location to do your locality guide for, really look at your research question or objective and try to figure out what location is most likely to hold the answer.
Right. And be specific. The more specific we can get with the records, the better success we're going to have with our research.
But that doesn't mean that we should rule out the higher level jurisdictions that include that place. So I did Montgomery County, Arkansas, but the federal records about his Civil War service at the country level are the ones that were actually the most helpful for that objective, because the federal sources are the ones that contained the Civil War records, the compiled military service records.
Interesting. Yeah, it's always a really good point for us to remember. Check every jurisdiction, city or town, the county, the state, and federal. Or if you're researching in a different country, the different jurisdictions in the country, the province, the state, the township, whatever it is. So we always have to be aware of those different jurisdictions. So good point.
All right. So after you choose the location to focus on, what should we do next?
Well, I always like to go to a map. We have so many great resources online now for maps. And a very good place to start is a website that's mentioned in the book, and it's the Family Search Places website. And this will locate any place in the world. And once you find your location on that website, you'll also get research links and you'll get alternate names and jurisdictions. So Family Search Places, if you don't have the link to that, you can just Google that and that will come right up. Really, really good place to begin with any location that you are searching. And then if you're researching in the United States, there's the Atlas of Historical Geography of the United States, which gives you kind of a feel for the historical things that were going on in your ancestors' location. Cindy's List is a great website. I think a lot of people know about Cindy's List, and you can go to Cindy's List. She's got links from all over the internet about many, many different topics of genealogy. So you could just put in your location and you would get many links for that. A wonderful free resource is the David Rumsey Map Collection. And again, you can very easy to search. Put your location in the search tab, and then I love this because it's historical. So this is one that I use to try to figure out that Chickasaw Nation Indian Territory location. And I actually put in Chickasaw Nation 1900, and I found a map, and it helped me to really understand where this was in the context of the state of Oklahoma that the area would become. So David Rumsey Map Collection, really good resource for historical maps. Then, of course, we have Google Maps. Google Maps are great. They tell you, current day, what the cities, the towns look like, what streets look like. Sometimes you can locate the actual street, particularly if you're in a big city and you see on the census, on the big city censuses, uh, the census taker will actually write down the name of the street. And so you could use Google Maps and go find the street that your ancestor was living on if it's still the same. Sometimes they change, but that can be really fun.
I've done that with my kids, and we've showed them, this is where your great great grandmother lived, and this is the same house, and you can see the cellar that's in the ground, and you can kind of see the roof of the cellar, and they just love that. The street view is pretty awesome.
It is. I remember when you did that. That was with my grandparents' house. Yeah, that's really fun. Well, I used Google Maps when I was researching for one of my stories about my dad. It's when he was in, I can't remember what county. He was by Tahlequah in Oklahoma in the 1930s. And his history talks about how they had to drive up this little hill to get to the top, and they were going to live in this cabin. It was the middle of the Depression. They were very, very poor. And I wanted to see if I could figure that out. And he talked about a watering hole where they'd go swimming, and I pretty much located it from his description on Google Maps. It was really, really fun, and it looked like it hadn't changed at all, the area.
Wow, that's really fun. I really love Google Maps so much, and I use it all the time just for looking up anything in a record that I don't recognize and mapping out the distance between things. Like, what's the distance between this county and this town and this state and that state? So I can kind of see if it was within the range of my ancestors, where they lived and whatnot.
Yeah. Right. It gives us a real feel for things. When we rely too much just on paper records and localities and not really looking at them on a map, we can miss some very important clues. So one of the questions I had about, that marriage record with Dora and William was how far away Elmore City, which was their residence, was to Paul's Valley. And so I looked that up on that historical map from David Rumsey's map collection. And I was able to see that it really wasn't that far, and that certainly they could have traveled the distance. It totally made sense. And when I overlaid that or looked at that on Google Earth, I could see that, yeah, they didn't have to travel over a mountain range. It was just, there was a road there, and it looked like it was would have been an easy, common place for them to travel to. So it really helps us to make sense. On the other hand, if we look up a locality and we see that there was a huge mountain range and then supposedly they crossed that to the next state, sometimes things like that can give us some clues that things don't quite add up, because our ancestors didn't fly over the mountains. They were pretty much using their horses and wagons, and they had to be going on real routes and trails. They didn't have railroads before, 1860. So we have to kind of put ourselves back in time, think about what it would have been like for them. So a couple more great websites: Library of Congress maps for United States research, historical maps. Some of these you have to actually go there, but I feel like all these institutions are just trying to get more and more things digitized and available for us. So I really appreciate that. And then anyone who's a British researcher, another one of my favorite pages sponsored by Family Search is maps.familysearch.org, which has England jurisdictions of 1851. So that's going to show, so helpful if you're doing British research. That will help you pinpoint your county and then tell you all the parishes and civil jurisdictions. Sometimes these countries that we research in, they have multiple jurisdictions. They start having, if there's a state religion, they've got a jurisdiction for, the state church as well as the civil jurisdictions, and it can get really confusing trying to figure out what records to look at. So England research, maps.familysearch.org. Great place to start. And another one for England research is Vision of Britain Through Time, which has fabulous resources. And if you're researching in a different country, we all love Google. Just put in your country maps. And the Family Search Research Wiki, that also has really good helps for locating some of these websites in different countries.
Yeah, I've noticed that the Family Search Wiki, which has articles for all the different locations throughout the world, will have a list of maps that pertain to that area. So it's really helpful.
It is. And, the people that put together the wiki, they've done some searching to try to find things. So it can save you time just to start there. I always start with the Family Search Research Wiki with any of my locality guides, because why reinvent the wheel? If they have already located a lot of really good things, then there you go. But I have a funny story about that. When I was doing Chickasaw Nation, I went to the Family Search Research Wiki, typed in Chickasaw Nation, and what did it come up with? It said, this page does not exist. Would you like to create it? So in that case, it wasn't really very helpful for me. And I don't know if it's since been created. I haven't looked, in the last few months. And maybe when I have some time, I'll go create that, because I've learned a lot about that locality, and it'd be great to help someone else researching there.
Yeah, everybody can add to the research wiki. You just have to become an approved editor, I think. And then you can update the wiki with what you've learned about the location that you're an expert at. So that would be good.
Absolutely. I think it's really important to give back to the genealogical community. We really stand on the shoulders of so many people that have gone before us with indexing records, gathering records. And so anytime we have a chance to do something to give back, I think that's really an important thing to consider.
Good idea. All right, let's move on to another way that we can learn about the location, since we're on our question about where did it happen. And we talked about maps, a bunch of different resources for maps. And now let's talk about gazetteers. So if you haven't used a gazetteer before, it is a geographical directory, basically. And it has sometimes an alphabetical list of place names, including towns, creeks, valleys, cities, all kinds of different locations that might be found on a map. So it has them listed, and sometimes it will have a description of the place also. So if you find a place name on a record that you can't find on a modern map, then using a historical gazetteer could help you pinpoint where that location is. And one way to find gazetteers is to check the Family Search Wiki, like we mentioned, which has links to maps and gazetteers and other helpful things. There are some digitized gazetteers that you can find online at Google Books or Internet Archive, which are really both great resources for finding historical books that have been scanned. And another place that is an online gazetteer is the Geographic Names Information System, or GNIS. And the website for that is geonames.usgus.gov. We'll put a link to that in the show notes, but it's basically an online gazetteer that has the current locations and place names that are all around the country. And I think it's just for the United States. Is that correct?
Yes, that one's the United States location. So I just learned, or I just taught a class about the Family Search catalog. And if you haven't gone to the catalog before, when you go to the Family Search catalog, you can do a place search, and you can put your locality in there, and often those gazetteers will come up. There will be some books or resources for you to help you find books that will help you in your locality research. So Family Search catalog under location, and we'll talk more about that in later episodes, but just wanted to put a plug in there that's a great way to help. Family Search recognizes the importance of gazetteers, so they've actually digitized quite a few of those for locations.
That's wonderful. I love the catalog. What should we talk about next?
Well, let's do migration routes, because we need to really know how our people got from one place to another. Back to that whole idea of them traveling, by wagon and horse and buggy or whatever they did before the train and cars were invented. They had to take a route that people had traveled on before. And so we have these migration routes that are very common. We have several, usually they start in the eastern part of the United States, and then they come forward into the west. They go down to the south. They go across the northern part of the United States. It's how people moved west. And where can you find migration routes? Well, I'm going to say again, the Family Search Research Wiki. If you just put in migration routes and your location, you will get maps. You'll get links to other websites that will help you understand these. So think about, with your ancestors, how a settlement grew. In my case, with my Indian Territory people, I really didn't quite understand why people were moving up into Indian Territory. Let me just back up and explain a little bit about how Indian Territory was created. I had to learn this also. It was created when the 5 civilized tribes were moved out of the southeastern states and taken all over to the area where it would become Oklahoma. And so they each had their own little section. There was a Chickasaw Nation, there was a Cherokee Nation, the Choctaws, and there were 5 of them. So that's what that is. Now, why are my people from Texas going north up into Chickasaw Nation? I didn't really quite get that. But I learned that after the Civil War, that a few people from the South began moving into Indian Territory. And then people about 1890 became a big rush for Texans. And by the thousands, they moved up. And what they would do is just go up and get a lease from an Indian, and then they would be able to farm. So those leases would expire. They'd have to go move on, get another lease. So that helped me understand why my people were always moving around, because they could not own land in the Indian Territory. So understanding how that settlement grew, how, the Texan settlers came up, really helped me start making sense of the records. And why would they want to leave their home in Texas? Well, I think the land was probably better. Usually there's the lure of the land. It's going to be better. You're going to make more money. Things are going to be better, right? Grass is always greener on the other side.
Mm-hmm.
So,
good story. It must have been a hard life living in Texas and Indian Territory at that time.
Well, it's really funny because that they were previously living, I think, in Lubbock County, Texas. And I just recently talked to a young woman who had returned from living there for a couple of years. And she talked about how it was completely flat, really hot, really dry, and really dusty. Well, up in Chickasaw Nation, it was greener, it was more lush. So I'm thinking that would be a good reason to move if it was brown and dusty, and go up to where it's green and maybe prettier. I need to go visit. I haven't been there yet. I need to go see for myself what it was like.
That would be the ultimate kind of locality research, just going on a trip there and seeing what it's like.
That's exactly right. We need to do that.
Yeah, we do. All right. Well, now that we've talked about migration routes, let's talk about jurisdictions. We've mentioned this a few times. It's one of the most important parts of a locality research session, is determining all of the jurisdictions for the place you're focusing on. So jurisdictions defined is the territory over which the legal authority of an institution extends. So those institutions are typically the government, but it could also be a church or a community body. Typically, a government jurisdiction would be a town, a city, then a county, a state, and a national jurisdiction. And so when you are determining which jurisdictions might hold records for your family of interest, you need to determine what county is my town in, what state is my town in, what country is my town in, and then also consider which boundaries changed over time. If they were in one county in 1860, did that stay that way until the present day, or did it change in 1880 so that they were in a different county, and then did it change back? And you never know. Those boundaries are really important, and we'll talk more about boundary changes in a minute. But back to jurisdictions, it's so important to know all of the jurisdictions that could be involved with the place that you're focusing on, and especially church jurisdictions. And every church will have a different way that they divide up their locations. And, in the Catholic Church, you'll have a diocese and additional jurisdictions like that. And then in the Church of England, you'll have parishes, and then they have larger jurisdictions beyond that include all of what the bishop would look at. So you have to kind of learn about the church, the religion, and the boundaries within that.
Oh, good point. I'm glad you mentioned the church records, especially in some of the other countries. I just went to a couple classes on Irish research at the BYU conference on family history and genealogy. And this whole topic of jurisdictions was a big one because in Ireland, you've got your civil registration districts, you've got your poor law unions, then you have all your either Church of Ireland jurisdictions or the Roman Catholic Church jurisdictions. And, just looking at some of the maps that the presenter was showing us, oh, it was such a clear lesson on pinpointing your person and then trying to figure out all these different places to look for records. So, primary reason, I believe, for figuring out locality is knowing where to look for the records. So, for example, let me just give you a little example from the book about that marriage license of William Houston and Dora Algie. So, remember how on the actual license it says it was Indian Territory, Southern District? And I was so confused because I didn't know. They said that their daughter said they got married in Pauls Valley. They said on there that they're from Elmore. And I just didn't know what is this jurisdiction, Southern District? So here a Google search came to my rescue because when I put that in, I was taken to a pretty new website. It's an Oklahoma history website. And it clearly explained that before Oklahoma was made a state, when it was all still Indian Territory, the United States, they were the jurisdiction. There was not a statewide jurisdiction. It was the United States. And so it was the United States federal court, and they had divided it up into all these different districts, and Southern District was the one that encompassed the Chickasaw Nation. And so that's why the marriage license had to be issued from the Southern District. So it made so much more sense to me once I understood that. And it clearly said on the website that Pauls Valley was one of the federal court seats for the Chickasaw Nation. So it all came together. Once I had did some research on that locality, the jurisdictions, finally the locations made sense in the records. So you talked about boundary changes. We need to understand that things are as the United States was growing, as a county became filled up with people, they would divide that county. And all the records for your person might be in the parent county. Perhaps the census shows them living in another county. 1860 census is different from the 1850 census. Well, go take a look and see if possibly the county just split and they did not move. One of the presentations I listened to yesterday, someone gave an example about how their ancestor was listed in the records in 5 separate counties during their lifetime, looking at the boundary changes on the Newberry Library's Atlas of Historical County Boundaries. The researcher was able to determine that the family never moved, but that little particular place they were living kept getting sliced off and put into different counties or townships. So what looked like they were moving all over the place was just the county boundaries moving all around them. So this helps us a lot because those records don't always move with the person, or with the new county. They just tend to stay in the parent courthouse, county courthouse. So this is a great thing to add to your locality guide, to make a note of the different changes of jurisdictions. And also, if you haven't discovered the Atlas of Historical County Boundaries website, this is for the United States, then we will have a link to the show notes for you. You'll love that website. Now, what if you research in another country? Well, again, I'm going to send you to the Family Search Research Wiki, which will give you info about boundary changes. Particularly in Europe, if you're researching in, say, Germany and Poland, then you already know that not only would the boundary change, but sometimes the language would change. I was helping an individual once, and her people were there in Eastern Europe, and every few years, like maybe 10, 20 years, when a new government would take power, the records would be in a different language. So she had several different languages, and her people stayed in the same place, but depending on which country had power in the government, they would determine records be kept in that language. So there's a lot for us to learn about our localities and how to research in them.
Wow, there is so much that we're actually running out of time for this episode. Why don't we end here, and we'll do locality research part 2 next week?
That sounds great.
All right. Well, thanks for listening today, and we hope that you guys can get started on a locality guide for a place that you are trying to research in, and think about all those boundary changes and jurisdictions and ask the questions, what happened and where did it happen? And then in our next episode next week, we'll talk more about the third question, why did it happen?
All right. Have fun researching, everyone.
Thank you for listening to Research Like a Pro with Diana Elder, accredited genealogy professional, and Nicole Dyer. We hope that something you heard today will help you make progress in your own genealogy research. If you like what you heard, please leave us a review on iTunes or Stitcher, or visit our website, familylocket.com, to contact us. You can find our book, Research Like a Pro, A Genealogist Guide, on Amazon.com and other booksellers. We hope you'll start now to research like a pro.